I am passionate about maps, and what I'd love to do this evening is just to share with you a story about some truly extraordinary maps. And I'd like to start this first map on January 12th, 2010, precisely at 4 p.m., because that's when I turned on television to watch CNN. And what did I see and learn? That a devastating earthquake had just struck Haiti. Hundreds of thousands were feared dead. Some very close friends of mine were in Port-au-Prince at the time doing research. And I had no idea whether they were alive, whether they were hurt, or even worse. And I didn't know what to do, but just sitting there and watching the news and waiting for information just felt unbearable. I just felt like I needed to do something, anything. And so I figured, well, heck, I like to map. I'll start a map of Haiti. And that's what I started doing that evening. I found some Twitter users in Port-au-Prince who were starting to tweet live about the situation, documenting the impact and the needs. And I was following the news online, getting more reports and trying to map those reports as best as I could. And in addition to also mapping pictures and some video footage was coming out. And I was doing this during the first few hours thanks to, in part, this technology called Ushahidi, which means witness in Swahili. And the Ushahidi platform is this free and open source software to do this kind of live mapping. But to be completely honest, I had no plan, right? This was an emotional reaction. This was not a calculated, hey, let's create a map and we'll change the world. Absolutely not. And I had no idea whether this would be useful either. I just had to do something. And I certainly didn't expect the following to happen 10 days later, where the head of FEMA himself, Craig Fugate, referred to this map as being the most comprehensive and up-to-date map available to the entire humanitarian community. And that was sort of like, wait, what? No, we're just, But that's pretty amazing. I mean, it's obviously, let's think about this. FEMA was not behind this map, nor was the United Nations, and nor were professional humanitarian organizations for that matter. This map started in my living room in snowy Boston. It looked like this 10 days later, but it started right here with a bunch of friends, because after a day, I couldn't keep up with the information that was now going 24/7, the mainstream media, social media ramping up, and so on. So I sent out an email to some friends at Tufts University, where I'm a student, and I said, help, I'm trying to map Haiti because I think it's the right thing to do. I'm not sure. But a couple dozen friends of mine showed up over the next couple days into my living room and just mapped. And by the end of that week, some other 50 undergraduate students, and keep in mind this was winter break, show up on a Saturday morning at 8 a.m. to get trained in a lecture room on how to do live mapping, which we were sort of making up as we went along. And you can see how detailed this map quickly became. This really was no ordinary map. This map was changing every 10 to 15 minutes as more information was being mapped. This map was alive. And what's pretty remarkable about this story and this map is that here you had volunteers in Boston, and I should say other volunteers in Montreal, in Washington, D.C., in New York, in Portland, Oregon, in Geneva, and in London, primarily students, came together and formed their own situation room. So we were all sort of doing this ad hoc and mapping as fast as we could, using free and open source software, not from Silicon Valley, but from Africa, in order to save hundreds of lives in Haiti, some 1,500 miles away. And indeed, that's exactly what the first responders who used this map told us. Thanks to this map, using this map every hour of every day, they were able to save hundreds of lives. But this sort of extraordinary map would absolutely not have been possible were it not for two other rather extraordinary examples of ad hoc collaboration by just ordinary people who wanted to help. The first has to do with OpenStreetMap. So OpenStreetMap is a group of passionate mappers who crowdsource and create maps around the world for free and completely open that anybody can use. And when the earthquake struck, on that January 12th in the evening, if you looked at Google Maps or Bing Maps or Yahoo Maps, half of Port-au-Prince was missing. This was not an area that was a particular sort of priority for private sector companies. And of course, there's no way in heck that we could map what we did if we didn't have a detailed street map of downtown Port-au-Prince. I remember one tweet that we had gotten, or we had basically found when we were monitoring the Twitter sphere, was about an orphanage on a particular street at the intersection with some other street next to a church that was running out of water, and the 20 kids. All right, we have the street names, but we go to Google Maps and there's no street there or anywhere. Half of them are missing. So what my friends at OpenStreetMap did was get access to high resolution satellite imagery and begin painstakingly just tracing that satellite imagery on an OpenStreetMap of Haiti. And what this animation shows you is that particular process in motion. So down there you have the month of January. And as I mentioned, the earthquake took place on January 12th. Every single one of those edits is a manual edit by several hundred volunteers around the world. A total of 1.3 million edits took place within about a 10-day period. It's truly stunning. It's like a brain synapses just swarming. And sure enough, by the end of those 10 days, and even before that, we could start mapping a lot more. And needless to say, this has never happened in the history of humanitarian response. And again, these were not humanitarian professionals who'd necessarily done this before, just ordinary people. The first two people who started the first two edits, one was in Germany and the other was in Japan. The second story begins with this picture. Obviously, most people are not going to be behind the laptops or desktops, let alone have access to one or own one. But about 80% of people in Haiti have access to a cell phone. So we knew that there was no doubt if we really wanted to have an impact here, that SMS was going to have to be the solution. And so this is where two friends of mine jump in. Josh Nesbitt, within a 24-hour period, was able to secure a local SMS number, a short code, that anybody inside Haiti could text for free. They could text us their most urgent needs and their location. Now again, we were making this up as we went along. None of us had done anything like this before. So we didn't know whether this was going to work, obviously. We could definitely be wrong about this. But if we were right, if we were going to be right, and if we were going to start receiving text messages, clearly those text messages were going to be in Haitian Creole. And we don't speak a word of Haitian Creole, and neither does the humanitarian community, for that matter. So what my colleague Rod Monroe started doing within 2-3 days after the earthquake is recruiting volunteers on Facebook. And by the end of that first week, he had recruited some 1,200 volunteers, primarily from the Haitian diaspora, in 49 different countries around the world. And between them, over the period of about just over 6 weeks, they translated some 80,000 text messages that were coming directly from the disaster-affected population in Haiti, and translated these with an average turnaround time of about 10 minutes per text message. So that as soon as a text message left a cell phone in Port-au-Prince, we knew that within about 10 minutes, we'd have that text message translated and geo-referenced, and we could go ahead and publish that on the map. And if you think about 80,000 text messages, it's about 10 novels full of text. Now, these are the locations of these individuals, and they're not just dots, right? They're real people just like you and I, having plenty of other things to do, right? On a Thursday evening, for example. They have their own responsibilities, worries, family, and so on, but they took the time to translate text messages to help people thousands of miles away who they would never meet. And I think that's a pretty amazing testament to what we can achieve as individuals and as a community. The second map begins in March of this year in a very different type of crisis, certainly man-made for sure. We got a call from the head of information management at the United Nations, the organization, the office that's in charge of coordinating humanitarian response across UN agencies. And he basically said, listen, we have very little idea to what is happening in this country. We don't have any UN personnel down in Libya. We haven't had for years. Libya is basically a black box. Now he's Irish, so he said it less elegantly perhaps. He said we have bugger all idea what's happening in Libya. But he had just got on Twitter just last winter and was complaining when he was in Amsterdam about snow and everything. And he realized that there was a lot of content coming out on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Flickr and so on. He said, well, can you at least try and map all this information for us? And that's exactly what we did. Within a couple hours of that phone call, we started mapping Libya based on those social media feeds. And there was a lot to map. And we so this way created a live crowdsourced social media map in order to help create better situational awareness for the UN humanitarian response in Libya. And a few days later, we didn't expect this either, but the head of the World Food Program, the largest field-based UN agency in the world, Josette Sheeran, mentioned that, hey, her office as well, her team as well could make use of this information, this live information on this map to coordinate their relief operations along the Egyptian and Tunisian corridors. And this map very quickly became quite densely populated as well, just like we had in Haiti. Who was behind this map? It wasn't the UN, they asked for it. And FEMA, this is a bit further away from the US. It was actually a group called the Standby Volunteer Task Force. This is a network of about 600 volunteers from 56 different countries on last count that some friends and I sort of started organizing about a year ago, having seen what had happened in Haiti. This was a story about ordinary people, ordinary volunteers coming together to do something pretty extraordinary. And what was amazing is, you might remember that earthquake in Chile happened several weeks later, and then floods in Pakistan, fires in Russia. These volunteers kept coming back, and new ones started to join as well. And there was this whole movement that was beginning, and we figured we need to give these amazing people credit for what they do and give them a face, give them a brand. They really are the stars of crisis mapping. I like to refer to them as the Jedis of the crisis mapping world. They're the ones who are teaching the professional humanitarian community how to do this stuff. Ordinary people. And I bet you're wondering, how can I become a Jedi? Well, I have an answer for you. All you have to do is just send us an email. And we'd be more than happy to have you on the team. There's no obligation to volunteer. If you just want to come on board, learn a few things, how do you do this kind of live mapping stuff? And could it be applied for environment? Absolutely. Environmental mapping and other kinds of things, human rights, governance, and so on. Please join. We'd love to have you on board. The last map I wanted to talk about today is not a very happy map either, unfortunately. What's unfolding right now in the Horn of Africa is possibly one of the worst humanitarian crises in the past 60 years. And on top of that, as if the drought wasn't enough, the terrorist group Al-Shabaab is targeting civilians and targeting humanitarians on the ground, preventing access of very much needed goods, supplies, water, and food. So the UN doesn't have access to some key areas and doesn't have information about these key areas. They're just sealed off. So just a few weeks ago, earlier this month, some colleagues approached us and said, well, what if we created a live map of Somalia with a twist? What if, instead of ignoring the diaspora, as happens in many humanitarian response operations around the world, what if we put them in the driver's seat? We invite them to be a major partner in this initiative. There are about 25,000 Somalis living in Minnesota. So we reached out to them, we asked for volunteers, and this diaspora, being a diaspora in the definition of diaspora, they call back home, thousands of calls every day, back to all kinds of different areas, towns, places in Somalia, family members, loved ones, and so on. And with some help from some humanitarian experts and so on, we drafted a survey, a household survey, demographics, food security, water security. And just last week, this group of about 20 Somalis in Minnesota started filling out these surveys when they were calling back home. So we've had about 50 surveys right now. And this is simply just a pilot, really, right now. We're just seeing whether this could work, because it's never been done before. And we're reaching out to humanitarian organizations to get their feedback on this as well. Could this be useful? I think it certainly can. There's certainly hurdles, however, security, raising perhaps expectations as well, which we're very concerned about. But I think we can actually make a difference here in very much the same way as I think we made a difference in Haiti and in Libya, and perhaps even more. So what next? Well, over the past 3 or so years, some 20,000 maps have been created using this African technology, mapping technology, in about 140 different countries. And really for almost as many different reasons. I talked about humanitarian crisis, but also there's environmental monitoring, there's human rights, there's elections monitoring. I mean, anything that you can think about being mapped, you could, right? And just to convince you that I'm not actually Mr. Doom, Gloom, and Despair, you could even crowdsource your own burger map, right? Now, I have no idea who started this map, but obviously this person, he or she, wants to know where the best burgers in North America are, right? And I can guarantee you that that person did not spend 3 weeks mapping every single one of these. Just opened it up to the crowd and said, hey, where do you get the best beer in this part of the world and the best fries and so on. So what we're starting to see is not just a social media reflex where we jump on Twitter, jump on Facebook, blog, and so on, or jump on Wikipedia and create articles. Increasingly, we're seeing a mapping reflex that's starting to surface. People are turning to maps to share their stories. They're turning to maps to give people a voice, for example, in Somalia or in Haiti. But back to disaster response, and back home as well. There have been a dozen or so maps used across the US. The reason I want to share this map, which happened last year in February or March, I believe, in DC, big major snowstorm paralyzed the city, is because this was the first map that did something quite neat and extraordinary that had not been done before. Namely, the categories were not all doom, despair, gloom, forget it. They were not only looking to crowdsource the needs of the affected population, but they were trying to also reach out and crowdsource the solutions. Because we know full well in a disaster, in a crisis, people are going to be affected in different ways. That's just the nature of it. There are political reasons and all that kind of socioeconomic, but that's the way it is right now. But what if we gave those who were less affected the ability to not only just have a private emotional reaction and say, oh, I wish I could help, but say, hey, no, you can now offer your help. So one of the things I'm excited about doing with some humanitarian partners moving forward, and possibly on the Somalia map as well, depending on how things go, is in a way creating the match.com of humanitarian response. There are needs, and there are resources, and we need to find a way to efficiently, quickly match those so that ordinary people can come and help other ordinary people. We don't have to wait for the humanitarian organizations. I'll end on this slide. This is not a story about technology at the end of the day. None of the maps that I've just shown you would have had anything on them were it not for ordinary people coming together and wanting to make a difference. Those dots exist on those maps because this is story about being human, about humanity and starting a movement. It's ultimately a story about hope and the belief that we can do this differently and we can live in a different world. Thank you very much.